Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the Winning Agenda. My name is Jesse Muehlman-Marshall. Got a bit of a different video for you today, something we haven't done explicitly on this channel for Sorcery before, which is a draft walkthrough. Draft is, of course, one of my favorite ways to play the game. A lot of people coming from Magic and Flesh and Blood backgrounds no doubt enjoy draft as well. So what I wanted to do is give you a bit of a taste of how Sorcery draft stacks up, how it feels, what the draft experience is like, and take you through my picks as I go through a booster draft. So booster draft in Sorcery TCG, like with Magic or Flesh and Blood, is 3 booster packs. We played 25 spell minimum deck size for your spellbook and 12 minimum deck size for your atlas. Everybody was given a sorcerer avatar, so the default avatar was sorcerer that you'd be drafting around. But of course, if you draft one of the other avatars, you're welcome to play that as well. And then we had unlimited basic sites for people as well, so you don't need to worry too much about drafting sites in your draft. We took out the basic site and or the sorcerer from the back of the packs, so really what we were just drafting was the remaining cards in the pack. Of course, we had the news this week that beta is going to be delayed by a couple of weeks, which is disappointing. Delayed by about a month, actually, from the 6th of October, which was the original date, to I think it's the 10th of November now. Obviously a bit frustrating. I'm probably going to do a separate video to just talk about what that means for us at Plenty of Games in Melbourne and for this Melbourne community. As many of you know, we've been doing a lot of work to try and build the community here. We had this booster draft that we ran. We had 15 players playing, so basically 2 pods of 8. We had one person pull out late. Shout out to Dom. Thanks for ruining our second pod of 8, Dom. Dom's a good friend. But it was a great event, and we had those 15 players playing, and young Tiago, who was there with his dad, Umberto, managed to take out one of the draft pods, which was pretty cool. So yeah, we've been doing a lot of hard work to try and build our local community. We had what is, I think, the largest Sorcery event to date in person, which was I think we had about 37 people at our sealed event about a month or so ago. And then we've had this booster draft as well with 15 players, which was a lot of fun. But for now, let's have a look at this booster draft. Started off with the first pack. Cracking it open, and we see the 3 exceptionals, Flood, I think that's Updraft Ridge, Starseeds of in the unique slot, and then a foil Extinguish. Nothing really leaping out at me from the ordinary, so we're going to run through them in a bit more detail here. Get that focus right. So we've got Entangled Terrain, Rimland Nomads, Palirubats, which is fine. A foil Extinguish. We were playing Keep What You Draft, so it was definitely tempting for me to just take the foil. I think this focus should clear up in a second. Raise Dead, not a great one in draft. Flood, also, it's okay, but you don't generally want to go water straight away. There's really nothing in this pack that is sort of standing out to me as the auto first pick. There's none of the sort of first order, like Berry, Grapple Shot. Incinerate is a nice piece of burn, but it is 5 cost, so it comes out a little bit late. Removal is really important, but it is 4 damage for 5 mana is not a great rate. And it does put you a little bit behind on tempo if you're on the draw. So Incinerate's okay. Starseeds of just really not doing a lot. But we do take the Incinerate because other than that, it was really just Aramos Mercenaries. One thing I am looking for alongside removal is some decent sized bodies, and we see the Sandworm here in this pack. There's also another unique, so a Smokestats of Nyak. So if I was money drafting here, rather than drafting for you all from a strategic perspective for the camera, could have already had 2 uniques. We've also got a Sacred Scarabs, Disenchant is fine, York Crossbowman ranged is really powerful, Spectral Stalker is a decent aggro creature, and then I think there was another card that took my fancy as I ran through there. Alpha Dryads is decent. Oh, there you go. I thumbed it out of the pack as well. Alpha Dryads is a decent piece of ramp. So not a lot that's super exciting in this pack though. And what did I go ahead and take there? I think I actually just missed that. I took the Sandworm. So Sandworm, starting us off here, 2 fire cards. We've got a decent piece of removal, and Sandworm as a 4 power body is actually a lot better than it seems. Landbound is not a huge drawback since most people are not playing water. Although there are a few more people playing water in draft than in sealed. Water actually becomes a bit more of a decent support color if you can pick up the right water cards. So Scavenging Fiend, okay. Sirocco Scorpion's a lot better than Scavenging Fiend. Floodplain, an essential card if you're going to play water, but another Sandworm is pretty tempting. Unlikely Alliance is an option 4 mana to draw 2 cards is okay, but the fact that it's unreliable just really pushes it behind a lot of the just decent chunky minions we've got. Sirocco Scorpions is really good in fire because you've got spin attack and leap attack at ordinary and exceptional rarity, so you can pick those up pretty easily and use your Sirocco Scorpions and your Pit Vipers as pseudo removal spells. But Sirocco Scorpions is so much better than Pit Vipers, so the fact that it doesn't die to deserts is a huge deal. You can play Pit Vipers and just get completely blown out by your opponent playing a desert, whereas Sirocco Scorpions hangs around. So in this pack, we're looking at Cloud Spirit, Amazon Warriors. Cloud Spirit's not great. Amazon Warriors is just, I think, clearly the best ordinary spell here by a pretty large margin. Nothing else in the pack really taking my fancy. We'll flick through, I think, one more time here, just make sure. Wills of the Wisp is okay as a blocker, but you really don't want to be on the back foot in this format. You want to be putting down the biggest bodies as soon as possible and threatening your opponent, and then using removal to kind of back yourself up while you have tempo. So we've got 2 4-drops and a 5-drop on the minion side, and then a 5-cost spell. So at some point we're going to have to start thinking about curve, but it can be a bit of a problem to try and find your higher power minions. You can get stuck with a lot of 2s and 3s in your deck and then just die to 4s and 5s. So here we'd just much rather have those 4s and 5s to start with, and we can choose from the plethora, hopefully, of 2s and 3s. Alright, so the next pack we've got a Pufferfish and Ice Lance, Apprentice Wizard, Roaming Monster, Summoning Sphere. So all pretty nice cards. Summoning Sphere, a lot worse in draft than it is in constructed. Flanking Maneuver, also pretty cool. It's anything that's a cantrip is very good, and Flanking Maneuver does let you rearrange your stuff pretty well. But the problem with cards like Flanking Maneuver that don't let you kill stuff immediately or buff your creatures, or your minions rather, is that if you're behind on the board, it doesn't really help you get ahead on the board. And it doesn't give you any extra strikes. So Roaming Monster and Apprentice Wizard I think are better. Apprentice Wizard, reasonably expensive just for a cantrip. Like, it lets you fin your deck, it gets you a spellcaster on the board, but I'd much rather just have a beefy monster. Again, I have now picked, I think, 3 5-cost and 2 4-cost spells, and I'm very keenly aware of that. But we're not seeing the lower cost things that we want at the moment. That Men of Lang is an exception there that's coming through. Highland Clansman does fit well with the Roaming Monster now that we've ducked more into air. We are seeing a limited number of good earth cards, like it seems, as you would expect in an alpha draft, that a lot of people seem to be taking the good earth cards. There are a couple of not so good fire cards in this pack as well. So I've chosen to take the Highland Clansman because I think that is like almost first pickable. Although we are getting very high on the mana curve, Highland Clansman is just a really strong finisher with charge. Charge is just such a powerful keyword. That if you can get to that in the mid game, although it does cost you quite a bit to get up to 7 because you're going to have to play your 6th site and hope that it's a tower in order to be able to play the 7 cost, which does come at the cost of some cards because you have to be playing sites and drawing those sites rather than drawing spells and then tapping to drawing spells with your sorcerer. But Highland Clansman is a powerful enough effect that I'm kind of okay with that. In this pack, there's not really a lot going for us. Fade is an okay spell as a finisher. It can give you something of yours basically unblockable on a key turn, as well as replacing itself. And at worst, kind of it's a 2-mana cantrip. So, not at worst, if you have no minions on the board, it's not anything. But it can be a 2-mana cantrip most of the time because most of your minions are going to live on the opponent's side of the board most of the time, you'd hope. So keenly aware there that we've got 4, 5, 7, and the only 2 that we've got is not really something that we're going to be wanting to play early. So we're hoping to wheel sort of those Sirocco Scorpions, pick up some more small minions, maybe wheel one of the Men of Lang. Here we've got a couple of 2-cost minions, Rimland Nomads and Cloud Spirit. Neither of them are amazing. Cloud Spirit, that double threshold just absolutely kills that card because it means you can't play it on turn 1 off a tower, which just reduces its efficiency. Like any Earth 2-drop that you can't play on turn 1, it's 2-drops in air rather are basically 1-drops. Wall of Air, not something that we're looking for. So really I think here it's between Cloud Spirit and Rimland Nomads. Flood going around this late is something to consider because it is a pretty strong enabler of a lot of the most powerful water cards like Pirate Ship and Anui Undine. But we're not really going to be ducking into water here, I don't think, even though Pirate Ship to follow it up. Wind Sylph, also not something. 2-cost 1-power minion. Again, anything that's desertable is a lot worse. 1-power minions are a lot worse than 2-power minions just because deserts exist and have the ability that they do. So we're going to Not going to play that Windself even if we pick it. Disenchant, are we going to play it main deck? Questionable. Azurage Caravan is worse than all our existing 4 and 5 drops, so we're not going to be playing that. So we'll just take the Disenchant for now. So we've got Sandworm, Roaming Monster, Amazon Warriors, Highland Clansman, and then some stuff that's not looking great. Cloud Spirit's not the 2-drop we want, and it's not really... What we would like if we've got this much beefy stuff is either things that fight well early, which Cloud Spirit does okay, like because of its extra movement, you can go and pick off their 2-drops and 3-drops, even if they try to avoid you. So that's kind of good, that Cloud Spirit does that, but we'd rather have sort of some removal or some things that pressure early a little bit better. Ideally removal, I think, if we can land sort of like Firebolts, Heat Ray, those sorts of things that have 2-for-1 potential, as well as a berry or 2, that's sort of what we're looking for at the moment. Or a Lightning Bolt or Chain Lightning obviously would be nice as well. Mountain Pass not doing a lot for us. That Floodplain's going around really late. So clearly water's very open. Like we've got Flood, Floodplain, Pirate Ship have gone around in the last 3 packs. So we're hoping that somebody takes that signal to our left and goes into water. Mountain Pass not doing a lot for us. I mean, yes, it's an okay defensive card. Like if you can play it onto your middle site, you can block it up a little bit. Like you can put an airborne minion there, and that's kind of cool because you can sort of block off that access to enemy ground minions, and they can't attack your minion either. But it's not amazing. The other thing, that's just a junk pick there. The other thing about Mountain Pass is that in order to play it, because we're only playing 12 sites in the Atlas, you're generally going to have to forego playing a tower, and towers are just so good that I don't think you most of the time you really want to play most of the exceptional sites actually. So we've got 3 water cards here. We'll take Sleep, partly because it's the one that we least want to play against. It's a really solid removal spell, so we're happy not to play against Sleep. When I say it's solid, I mean we can save our own things from Sleep using a desert, but I did have somebody sleep one of my foot soldiers, which was on I think it was a Siege Ballista, which absolutely crippled me at one point. I needed that foot soldier not only to be a part of the Ballista crew, but also to help me attack later, and it just absolutely destroyed me, the fact that I lost that foot soldier to the sleep. So, look, that's a pretty niche corner case, where you can't desert your own thing, but I mean there are lots of other cases where you have a minion that's on a site that doesn't have any nearby voids, so you couldn't play a desert to wake it up anyway. But Sleep is, yeah, it's a decent removal spell, put it that way. It's not quite as solid as Bury or Drown. So opening up the pack from the bottom, make it a bit easier. Oh, we still had some picks going from pack 1. Whoopsie daisy. So we'll get our last card. It's a Swan Maidens. And then we'll take a look at this pack. So pack 2, we've got Holy Ground, Ruins, Undertow, Great Old One. So if we'd chosen to go into water, could have had a Great Old One. 8 feels like a lot, but it does a lot. We've got a Belmont Longbowman, which is nice. The rest of the pack's still pretty bad. Like I think Belmont Longbowman is probably the best ordinary I saw there. And it's pretty good. Like ranged is strong. Ranged and 3 power is very decent, but I guess you could say Drown is maybe better than Belmont Longbowman, but we're very much not in water. And at this point, I don't really want to pivot into water, even though that Great Old One is pretty juicy. Like if we'd taken the Flood, the Pirate Ship, the Floodplain, and some of the other decent water stuff in the first pack, then we'd be laughing right now with having this Great Old One. That'd be really cool. It still might not be the best deck, but I think with a water, you know, maybe playing some towers for some acceleration or helping us reach the top of our curve, it could be cool. And a Wrath of the Sea comes around straight after it. So whoever is drafting that water deck to our right, if they manage to pick up any of that sweet stuff in pack 1, they're also going to be picking up a Wrath of the Sea here and maybe wheeling a pirate ship as well. But for us, there's a lot of water cards in this pack. A lot. And the best card in our colors is probably Overpower, but we're pretty light on Earth at the moment. Sunken Treasure not going to do anything for us. Dodge Roll, Tide Naiads, Riptide, all decent cards for water. Pirate Ship decent. So, like, do we take a teleport second pick? Like, that's miserable. We do. So we could have taken that Overpower. I think Overpower is probably better. Well, it's definitely better. Teleport is not an amazing card. I think I was probably, at that point, thinking about maybe picking up a few more utility things like Sirocco Scorpions in Fire. Plumed Pegasus kind of fits on our curve nicely here, so we're happy with that. Another Drown and a Stormy Seas going around for water. So yeah, could have definitely had a strong water deck in our seat. Cave Trolls is also nice. So if we'd taken the Overpower last pick and then we took the Cave Trolls here, we could be cutting Earth a little bit more heavily, which might be good. But Plumed Pegasus is just a better card than Cave Trolls anyway, so we're okay with that. So target 3 sites with Meteor Shower, deal a bit of damage. Considered whether that's worthwhile, since we are almost certainly going to be playing Fire, but 9 is just so much. Like 7's already a stretch for the Highland Clansman. Meteor Shower, that 9 does a lot of work, but I just don't think it quite gets there. So this pack, another Riptide, which is good. Gaia Hippogriffs, which we're pretty happy to see. Although it's a 4, you know, it's a really powerful 4. Helps close out games, gives us another charge option. We've got Blink as well. We've got Spin Attack, which is nice if we do manage to pick up any of the lethal minions. And then we've got another Overpower at the back of the pack. So some decent cards in here for us. And I think it's probably just Gaia Hippogriffs. Yeah, so considering that Spin Attack as a wheel, potentially, we're pretty much ignoring the water cards. Another Stormy Seas, so plenty of removal in water. That's like Wrath of the Sea, Great Old One, 2 Stormy Seas, 2 Drowns we've passed so far this pack, plus 2 Riptides. Lots of repositioning, lots of removal, but we'll just slam the Gaia Hippogriffs here. Doesn't really keep our curve down. The Plumed Pegasuses, or Pegasi, here are giving us a little bit more action at 3, but there's a Border Militia there, which is such a strong card. So I think I do take the Plumed Pegasus here, but Border Militia, definitely worth considering as something to slow the game down. I think probably overlooking that there is an error. I could have been, I think at this point, cutting Earth a little bit more aggressively, trying to maintain a presence in the Earth part of this draft by passing Border Militia, by passing the Overpower earlier in the pack. I was very much seeding that, which makes the Amazon Warriors a lot worse. But also air functions a lot better as a splash than Earth, I think, most of the time. Also villages. Towers and villages are both good, but you'd rather, I think, play more villages and fewer towers most of the time in your deck. Just because every village does something good, but obviously every tower doesn't. It's only the first of each type that you play that gives you the benefit. We do have that Ruins, which is giving us a little bit of fixing, so that makes playing 3 colours a little bit easier. We've started to bring the curve down a little bit, but we do just need more removal. I mean, all of those plays that we're making early, the Plumed Pegasus and the Cloud Spirit, they're not really going to deal with it on the draw if we get behind. Because if our opponent just plonks down a good minion on, say, turn 2, accelerating out with a tower, if they play 3 power, if our play is Plumed Pegasus, they just go remove your Plumed Pegasus, maybe play something else small, and then hit you for 3. And at that point, we're behind on tempo. We don't really have many ways to get tempo back, short of playing like a big blocker. But again, that's just vulnerable to being removed and them just continuing on their merry way. So here we've got another Highland Clansman, which is tempting. But again, we're now starting to get pretty desperate for any kind of removal in fire, air, or earth. And we haven't really seen much. So we had a Spin Attack, which we could have taken early, but I think we're trying to wheel that, and getting more minions at a lower cost was essential if we were going to ever play Spin Attack anyway. So I think taking a lower cost minion was the right pick over it. Taking the Highland Clansman here, we could like take a Wall of Fire and try and slow the game down. But it is a bit rough. So Spectral Stalker and Men of Leng, both good air 2-drops, which gives us a little bit more interactivity early and lets us maybe think about even pressuring our opponent. So happy to take either of those. Overpower again is another good option for breaking up combat, but we do need some more bodies to get down on the board earlier. Overpower, I could have had 2 Overpowers from this pack, and they do potentially give us some really strong plays. Like pumps in this game are actually really good, and they can function as pseudo removal spells in a way. Because there's no instant speed plays, they basically let you bite your opponent. They can function as sort of a rabid bite type effect, a lot more than you might think coming from a magic background, where a pump spell still gives your opponent a lot of windows to, that you can't attack your opponent's creatures. If you giant growth your creature, you have to attack them, and then they still have the option to block. So you have to play it in combat, and then you might be vulnerable to their own combat tricks or their own responses. Whereas in Sorcery, you can just main phase and overpower, and then choose to attack their minion, and you have perfect information, and you know that they can't respond. So it is actually a lot more powerful of a card than it might appear. But anyway, we opted not to take the overpowers, and instead we've got a couple of smaller minions, which is good. So we've got the Men of Lang now. But I think at this point in the draft, I'm feeling the deck's a bit disjointed, and it really is just lacking in removal. So all of the removal that's coming through our seat is either soft removal like Overpower, which we've opted not to take, and we've taken the minions instead, because Overpower admittedly doesn't function if you don't have the small minions anyway, or it's things in water that we've just chosen not to take. So we take a Scent Hounds there over something like Riptide probably, which is almost certainly the best card in that pack. But we're just not going to play it, whereas we might actually, unfortunately, end up playing something like Scent Hounds here as a small minion, just because we really are desperate for some things at the lower end of the curve. So I know I've made some picks, like the Highland Clansman and even the Sandworms and the Roaming Monster early, where I could have taken... With some of them, I could have taken like mediocre small minions. But there are just so many decent smaller minions and removal spells at Ordinary that I would have expected to see a few more of them by this point in the draft. So yeah, probably the Overpower picks are the ones that I'm regretting the most here. Miracle Workers is okay. It does let us sort of trade and then get our creature back. Stormy Seas, a very powerful card to be going around this late. So we'll stop somebody wheeling that. I think if someone's committed to water, they've already got rewarded enough that they're not going to duck back out of it. So we can just cut what is a pretty strong removal spell from our possible water opponents here. And getting towards the end of pack 2. So I'm not going to see any new cards. There's no, at this point, all we can do is try and wheel some of the 2-drops, which we managed to there. So I picked up a Rimland Nomads, which I was actually okay with. I mean, I generally cut Rimland Nomads from my deck at the end in deck construction in every sealed event I've done so far. I've considered it and then ended up cutting it because there's just better 2-drops, but at this point we're not sure that we are really going to have enough things in that 2-drop slot. So another Scent Hounds, better than Unravel I think for us at this point. I mean, we are so short on removal that we might consider playing something like Unravel, and I think that's why I took it there. End up with another Unravel anyway, last pick. So there are a few creature type removal spells like Unravel. Mortality I think is a lot better because it hits Foot Soldier tokens, whereas Unravel doesn't. So Foot Soldier tokens, there's a decent chunk of your opponents who are just going to be getting those from their basic sites, so you might as well sort of play the Mortality because a decent chunk of games you're going to have at least something to target it with. So we've got a Flaming Sword in this pack, which is kind of removal. Vile Imp, which is exactly the kind of thing that we've been waiting to see. The aforementioned Mortality. And really nothing super exciting in the Exceptional and Elite slot, other than possibly that Flaming Sword. But Flaming Sword, it's a big risk if you play it on anything other than your avatar, because if they get it, it's pretty damn strong. It's 4 cost, so it's not cheap. And you don't really ever want to be getting your Sorcerer into combat in draft because drawing the extra card is just so good. So I leave the Flaming Sword be here and just take the Vile Imp because I think it's one of the best Ordinaries that you can get in Fire, possibly the best. So we've got a Poison Nova here. Speaking of removal, that's a sweet removal spell. Got Highland Clansman, which we're definitely going to be foregoing. Warp Spasm, which turns one of our minions into a pretty powerful removal spell. And then we've got the Rolling Boulder, which I think is probably one of the best cards in the set to take. It very often early on, it can just let you hit your opponent for 4 and kill, often 2 for 1, sometimes 3 for 1 them, even if they're trying to spread things out along the middle of the board. So Rolling Boulder, just a great 4-drop. Poison Nova, also really strong and can get you that 2-for-1, 3-for-1, get you back in the game. So it's really a toss-up between those. Warp Spasm is really good, but it does require... It's a bit more situational. It requires you to have a minion in play, and it has 3 fire thresholds, so it's got 3 things sort of going against it compared to the Boulder or the Nova. So really, I think this is a choice between Rolling Boulder and Poison Nova, and I think if I had my time again there, I would just take the Rolling Boulder. Poison Nova is... They both have restrictions, but... Rolling Boulder, being able to hit your opponent for damage and just fulfill a few more requirements in your deck, or a few more functions, is really where you want to be. And then this pack, we've got Heat Ray and Lightning Bolt as exactly what we're after. You know, Earth, Fire, 2 of the best common, or rather ordinary removal spells. Heat Ray has more of a capacity to 2-for-1 early in the game, which is really what we're looking for here. So I think we'll take the Heat Ray over the Lightning Bolt. Maybe wheeling something like a Men of Lang or a Blink, which would be cool. So finally seeing some of those air and fire power cards coming through in Pack 3. Pack 2 was a miserable experience. After Pack 1, we took all these kind of strong, chunky mid-range minions. We then ended up with a bunch of pretty mediocre low drops. Plume Pegasus are fine, but they're not as exciting as something like a Violymp that's often just a built-in 2-for-1. It lets you get tempo back. It does a whole lot more for you than just flopping down a 3-cost, 3-power minion that will often just get eaten or removed. But we're starting to build the spine of a decent curve. That Violymp was a massive pick, and Heat Ray as well just really gives us the opportunity to survive into the late game a lot more often. And Poison Nova lets us deal with problematic large minions coming at us as well. So Cave In is another option for removal here. It's a berry with upside. So I think that's probably the right pick. Aramos Mercenaries, another 3-drop, 3-power minion that's okay. Not a lot else going on. We're not going to play Dwarven Digging Team as a 2 Earth threshold card. And Cave In, yeah, I mean, it lets you... At worst, it's a berry most of the time. For 4, and sometimes you get some artifacts or 2 minions as well for the price. So Cave In, a sweet piece of removal. Yeah, I made it look like I was tossing up between that and the Aramos Mercenaries there, but it definitely shouldn't have been. I mean, I know that Earth is going to be a splash and at this point. And again, we could have had some more powerful Earth stuff from Pack 2, which would have been good, rather than some of that mediocre stuff that we ended up taking. But taking the good Earth card now is definitely the right way to go. And anything that lets us play a few more villages here is also going to be good. That's the other reason that playing some of the chunkier minions in your deck, if you have more villages in your deck, is also okay, because you get some blockers from your villages. So here we've got another Plumed Pegasus, a York Crossbowman, which is better but double Earth, and then a Maddening Bells, which is another one of my favorite cards. It doesn't function super well in this deck because we don't have enough low drops to really support just getting in there and dumping it on our opponent before they can do anything, but the upside of it is just so massive. So another Plumed Pegasus look would be pretty good for our curve. York Crossbowman, Cave Trolls would be nice as well, but we might as well take the Pegasus because it's just better. But I think we ended up taking the Maddening Bells there for the upside. You know, it has some pretty amazing upside if you can land it on turn 4 or turn 3 off a tower. If you can go like, I don't know, turn 2 Cloud Spirit, turn 3 Maddening, move in to their side of the board and Maddening Bells, it's pretty good. Off a tower. Palibri Bats here, better than Pit Vipers for the aforementioned reason of getting deserted. Pit Viper's just not a great idea as a blocker, and Palibri Bat's fine as a 2-cost, 2-power minion that has Airborne. Burrowing and Submerge, both not very relevant in draft. Common Sense here, pretty good. Common Sense and Overpower, pretty clearly the 2 best cards in this pack. Pit Viper's still just getting deserted. Common Sense when we've got so many good common or ordinary removal spells in Lightning Bolt and, in Heat Ray. Heat Ray is our only one, isn't it? Because Lightning Bolt and the Heat Ray are in the same pack. I still think Common Sense was the right pick there. It lets us get the best of our minions. Vanguard Knight's also pretty clearly the best pick here. I am acknowledging at this point that I'm so desperate for removal that I'm considering taking this Mortality. But Vanguard Knights, it's a really good card. It's a 3 cost, can be 4 power. And I think our deck could probably have supported going into more Earth. There was just a little bit more Earth going around than I think I felt. Admittedly, in the draft games, that Mortality ended up being pretty good. Like, it did kill some relevant stuff. And my deck was so short on removal that I really needed that. But playing more things like the Vanguard Knights not only helps at the lower end of our curve than something like a Men of Lang does, because we don't really have the maneuverability spells. I know we had a teleport, but you'd rather not be playing the teleport, to be honest. We don't really have the maneuverability spells to support things like Men of Lang, and what we do have is things like Cave In, that the more Earth cards we play that are better, the more reliably we are going to be actually able to play the Cave In, and also the more decent Earth cards we play, the more villages we get to play, the more nice little 1-drops we have to just gum up the board, rather than having to spend cards playing things like Men of Lang or Pit Vipers to try and slow things down. We can just slow things down just enough by having Foot Soldiers, and then hopefully bring to bear our more powerful cards later. So our more powerful minions, that is. So I think I did miss a trick here in this draft by not taking some of those Earth cards to support that, and instead focusing on some of those air minions, which are just not so good early in the game and are just pretty vulnerable. Lucky Charm, not really doing anything for us. A Fade can help with that Men of Lang plan if that is something we want to go for. Windsylph, just really not doing anything. You know, the ability's okay, but the vulnerability to deserts is just such a big issue. Free movement is nice. Like, there's no denying that that can be a big deal. It can also help later in the game to stop you being too vulnerable. But there we have it. So let's recap that draft. So we've got the Windsylph, which we're going to be cutting. Pit Viper's probably cutting. We'll go through deck construction in a moment. Ended up just not having enough removal. So we've got Cave In, Poison Nova, Incinerate, and the Heat Ray, but just really needed some... The fact that Incinerate and Poison Nova both cost 5 means they're not interacting on the turns when we need our removal to be live. So that's the weakness of the deck. I guess that's why that Mortality was perhaps a decent pick, just to have some way to interact in those earlier turns. Violent is going to be really important, so hopefully we draw that. And other than that, just got to hope that the smaller minions can actually slow things down enough for our bigger minions to close out the game. So let's take a look at deck construction. We've got So the way I do my deck construction is I lay things out in mana cost order and have minions and then non-minion spells separated. So we've got 1 cost, the 2 costs, finishing off the 2 costs there with the Cloud Spirit, then the 3 cost minions being Apprentice Wizard, Plumed Pegasus, and we've got a few too many 4s and 5s, 4s, 5s and 7s. So ideally when we say curve, you want this to be probably 2 and then peaking at 3 and then heading down, whereas we sort of peak at 2 and then it's pretty solidly even rather than thinning out as we get higher, which is not really where we want to be. We'd rather have some more powerful 3-drops and fewer 2-drops, and those spells don't do a lot early and they're even worse late, whereas the 3-drops are actually, in these kind of decks, the things that can give you strategic advantage in the early games and actually push significant amounts of damage. So we are short on 3-drops, we've got a few too many chunky cards, and we don't have enough ways to reclaim tempo, as we talked about in the drafting portion. We're very heavily reliant on Cave In and Poison Nova doing big work for us, or if we're on the play, getting one of our 2-drops in there and landing the Maddening Bells early to really slow them down. We've got Miracle Workers, Disenchant as sort of options in our sideboard, and Windsylph, but really I don't think we don't need more 2-drops, and we certainly don't need 2-drops that cost 1. So that looks like where we've ended up. So that's 25 cards. that's what we ended up playing. I think I might have brought in the Miracle Workers actually after I did this very quick deck construction, swapped them in for the Teleport or the Fade, I think. Just because the Miracle Workers, as I said, can let you sort of trade and actually get back one of your decent minions, because we don't really have a huge number of those. But yeah, the deck turned out okay. So I think in retrospect, as I talked about during the drafting portion, we could have more heavily targeted Earth things, which would have made our Amazon Warriors, Cave In, and the Miracle Workers better and more consistent. It would also have let us play more villages and probably play fewer of these mediocre 2-drops. Sailor V didn't end up getting there. We had things like the Heat Ray and the Lightning Bolt, 2 cards we desperately needed, both being in the same pack, which was frustrating. But the deck ended up being okay. So because we only had 7 players, I had a bye. So I only got to play 2 rounds. So I went 1 win and 1 loss. They were both really cool games. Ended up losing to very much to that Rolling Boulder that I passed instead of taking that over the Poison Nova. I think if I'd had the Rolling Boulder, the deck would have also felt a lot better. Poison Nova is just a bit too awkward to land profitably in draft when your Sorcerer is so immobile, and a lot of the damage, if your opponent's playing well, is tending to come wide on the board, and so it's quite difficult to even get into a good position to cast Poison Nova, even though we have things like an Apprentice Wizard in the deck. So that was a pick I regret. Not having the overpowers hurt us, but in the end, a decent deck, and hopefully you enjoyed looking through the draft with me. So thanks for watching. A bit of a longer video. I apologize for the time that took, but running through a whole draft does take a little while, and the deck construction as well. So yeah, hope you enjoyed, and I'll be back with more limited content, more gameplay, and hopefully a bit more of constructed and things like that as well in the future. And we'll have a bit of a chat about what the beta delay means for all of us. But until next time, I've been Jesse for the Winning Agenda. Cheers.